I will make the gentleman walk, if you release my father. The words shot through the courtroom like an arrow, shattering the heavy silence that preceded the verdict. A child of only 7 had dared to say something unthinkable to the most feared judge in the city. Her voice did not tremble, but the entire hall erupted in laughter. Lawyers mocked her. Reporters hurriedly scribbled in their notebooks as if they were witnessing a performance. Relatives shook their heads in disbelief. To everyone present, it was nothing more than an absurd scene. A skinny girl in a simple dress and worn sneakers promising to make a man walk again, a man who had spent 15 years confined to a wheelchair. Judge Fausta, known for his severity and coldness, glared at the girl, frowning. His stern face, marked by deep lines of rigidity, was the portrait of a man who believed in nothing anymore, except the law and the papers on his desk. "Girl," he said in his cutting voice, "this is a court of law, not a circus. Your words do not change justice. Your father will be convicted, and no miracle will prevent that." The laughter grew louder. A woman whispered loudly, "Poor thing, she's lost her mind." Another man jeered, "Then make him dance, girl, we're waiting." On the defendant's bench, the father sat in handcuffs, silently crying. His shoulders trembled, not from fear of the sentence, but from the pain of seeing his daughter humiliated. He tried to stand, pleading, "Daughter, don't do this, don't degrade yourself for me." But Veronica did not give up. She lifted her chin, took several firm steps toward the center of the hall, and looked the judge straight in the eyes. Her small clenched fists trembled, yet her voice grew even stronger. "I will make the gentleman walk, but first release my father." The judge gripped the armrest of his chair. That phrase had struck a wound he'd hidden from the world. The accident that had left him paralyzed. 15 years of listening to doctors say he would never walk again. 15 years of pain, anger, and growing coldness. And now before him stood a child claiming she could return what life had taken away. Fausta tried to laugh, but he couldn't. The entire courtroom waited for his answer. He cleared his throat and finally growled with arrogance. "You have 2 minutes. Show me this impossible miracle. And when you fail, you'll learn that justice cannot be bought with tears and childish tricks." A heavy silence fell over the room. Even the most cynical onlookers didn't dare to laugh now. The girl's gaze carried something different. It wasn't innocence, it was burning faith, a spark that was almost impossible to ignore. Her father wept, her mother cried in the back rows. Journalists zoomed in their cameras. Guards watched her every move warily. But Veronica saw only one man in front of her. She took a deep breath, slowly approached the wheelchair and reached out her small hands. Her eyes were steady, her voice calm but filled with conviction. "This is not a dream. It's a promise. The gentleman will walk, and everyone here will see it." And the courtroom, which moments ago had burst into laughter, now held its breath, as if something invisible was about to happen. Veronica knelt before the wheelchair. The cold marble floor bit into her thin knees, but she didn't care. She placed her trembling hands on Judge Fausta's motionless legs and closed her eyes, whispering soft words, almost like a child's prayer. The tension in the room was suffocating. Every gaze was fixed on her, some mocking, others doubtful, a few compassionate. But no one believed. No one dared to imagine it could be real. A man in the back shouted mockingly, "Come on, miracle girl, make the judge dance." Laughter erupted across the room. Some clapped, others whistled as if they were at a cheap show. The sound of laughter echoed off the marble walls like cruel hammer blows. The judge, though still stern, did not laugh. His eyes were half closed, studying the girl with a mixture of contempt and something deeper, a remnant of doubt, a shadow of hope he himself did not understand. But Veronica did not falter. Her lips kept moving, whispering softly. Her small, trembling voice carried more strength than any rehearsed speech. It was pure, innocent, burning faith. Suddenly, the judge raised an eyebrow and let out a dry, cruel laugh, cold as steel. "This is pathetic. Nothing happened. A child trying to play miracle worker in a court of law." His laughter was the signal for everyone else to burst into even louder mockery. A woman shook her head and said loudly enough for all to hear, "Poor thing. She'll grow up traumatized after this farce. The girl's heart seemed to shatter into pieces. The tears she had fought so hard to hold back now streamed freely, and all she could see were mocking smiles, scornful stares, pointing fingers. Her father tried to rise in desperation, shouting, "Stop this. She's just a child." But the guards pushed him back onto the defendant's bench, holding him firmly. Ramiro wept, helpless, crushed by his daughter's humiliation. The girl slowly stood up. Her legs trembled, her face flushed with shame. She tried to breathe, but the lump in her throat choked her. She looked at her father with eyes full of tears, the eyes of someone silently begging forgiveness for not being able to save him. The crowd laughed even louder. Reporters eagerly scribbled down every detail. The judge cleared his throat and struck his gavel against the wood, restoring order with his iron voice. "Enough of this farce. We proceed to the verdict." At that moment, Veronica understood the full weight of cruelty. Her sincere attempt to save her father had been turned into a spectacle, a reason for ridicule. But fate, silent and unseen, was already preparing to turn the page. The courtroom was still filled with cruel laughter as Veronica, defeated, began to walk away. Her faded blue dress swayed slightly as she stumbled on her own steps, trying to flee from the humiliation. Hot tears streamed down her cheeks, dripping onto the cold marble floor, marking it with her pain. Ramiro, chained to the defendant's bench, cried out desperately, "Veronica, my daughter, don't leave me." But his voice was drowned by the noise of the courtroom, the poisonous whispers and the scratching pens of reporters recording every detail of the scene. Judge Fausta adjusted his glasses and took a deep breath, ready to return to his merciless composure. He took the sheet with the verdict and raised his firm voice. "Ramiro Sandoval is sentenced to 10 years in prison." He didn't finish. Something strange passed through his body. At first, it was a slight pressure in his chest as if the air had become thicker. Then a barely noticeable tingling ran along his right calf. Fausta froze for a moment, frowning. Impossible, he thought. It had been 15 years since the accident, 15 years without feeling anything from the waist down. He took a deep breath, trying to convince himself it was only fatigue, a psychological illusion born from the child's words. But the tingling grew stronger. It became a gentle warmth, then a real pulse. Fausta gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles whitening, his heartbeat quickening. Meanwhile, no one noticed. The courtroom was still laughing. Some were joking. Others were getting ready to leave, certain they had only witnessed a childish farce. But Fausta knew something was happening. He cautiously tried to move his toes inside his shoe, and for the first time in 15 years something responded. It was just a faint twitch, a barely perceptible motion, but it was real. His eyes widened. Cold sweat appeared on his forehead. "This can't be, not here, not now," he muttered to himself. He tried to compose himself, clearing his throat, but his trembling hand betrayed his unease. His eyes, once cold as stone, now carried something new, fear. Veronica, still standing near the door, suddenly stopped, as if she had felt something. Slowly she turned around. Her tear-streaked eyes met the judge's. For a moment, silence enveloped the room. The cruel laughter ceased, not because people understood what was happening, but because an inexplicable tension filled the air. A heavy, dense silence, as if everyone sensed that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Fausta took a deep breath, struggling to maintain his composure, but deep down he knew. The girl's promise had not been just a desperate plea. Something impossible was awakening inside him. The silence hung thick in the courtroom. The laughter that had echoed seconds before turned into uneasy murmurs. Judge Fausta, always so unyielding, now seemed different. His hands trembled slightly over the dark wooden bench, and a bead of sweat rolled down his wrinkled forehead. Veronica, standing by the door, continued to gaze at him. Her eyes, still full of tears, now carried something greater, hope. As if she, before anyone else, could feel that her promise had not been in vain. Suddenly, the sound of scraping metal echoed through the hall. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but some noticed. The judge's legs had moved. "Sir, did you see that?" whispered a reporter in the front row, lowering his camera in disbelief. "It can't be," murmured a woman, clutching her husband's hand beside her. The guards by the defendant's bench looked at each other in confusion. Even Ramiro, the girl's father, suddenly lifted his head, eyes wide, as if a spark had pierced his weary soul. Fausta, shocked, tried to hide it. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat, but his voice failed him when he attempted to continue reading the verdict. "Ramiro Sandoval is hereby," he stopped. The tingling was now undeniable. A warm sensation slowly climbed up his legs, a feeling he had long forgotten. His knees, once as immobile as stone, began to respond with short, involuntary spasms. The audience, once skeptical, now leaned forward with wide eyes. The courtroom that had been filled with mockery only minutes ago was now overcome by absolute tension. No one dared to laugh. Veronica took a few steps forward. Her childlike yet steady voice echoed through the hall. "I told you, the gentleman will walk." The girl's words cut through the air like an invisible blade. The judge tried to ignore them, but his body betrayed him. He gripped the armrests of his wheelchair so tightly that his nails nearly scratched the polished wood. His breathing grew faster. This is impossible," he murmured quietly, but his voice was caught by the microphones placed around the courtroom. Now there was no doubt, something extraordinary was happening. A grave silence filled the room, yet it was not an empty silence. It was the silence of expectation, as if everyone there was ready to witness the impossible. And at the center of it all stood a 7-year-old girl in a simple dress, her tear-streaked face lifted, her shining eyes fixed on the judge, eyes filled with unshakable faith, the kind few adults in the world could ever sustain. The entire courtroom held its breath. What had moments ago seemed like nothing more than a child's audacity was now turning into a spectacle of collective astonishment. All eyes were fixed on Judge Fausta, the stern, unyielding man who had not risen from his wheelchair in 15 years. His body trembled, sweat streamed down his severe face. He tried to maintain his composure, to cling to his authority, but he could no longer control what was happening. The muscles in his legs, dormant for so long, responded with involuntary contractions. A dry wooden thud echoed through the hall as his right leg struck the base of the chair. A cry of shock rippled through the room. "He moved," someone shouted, too loudly to be ignored. Reporters' cameras began clicking in rapid succession, capturing every second. Journalists who had mocked the girl only minutes earlier now fought for the best position. Fausta shut his eyes tightly as if he could deny reality. But when he opened them again he could not hide the terror on his face. The impossible was happening before him. Little Veronica took another step forward. Her sweet yet firm voice rang clearly in the absolute silence. "I said, the gentleman can still walk." Fausta tried to speak, but his throat closed up. His hand trembled as he reached for the armrest of the chair. For a moment, it felt as if the whole world had stopped. Then, with visible effort, he began to lift his body. The metallic creak of the wheelchair echoed like thunder through the courtroom. Everyone stood up at once, a mix of disbelief and reverence filling the air. With each inch the judge rose, disbelief gave way to absolute awe. When he finally stood upright, the silence was broken by a collective gasp. Fausta, trembling, leaned on the desk before him and stared down at his legs, as though he were standing before a miracle his mind could not yet accept. 15 years, he whispered almost soundlessly. 15 years. Tears he would never have allowed himself to shed in public now flowed freely down his face. The spectators, once cruel and mocking, were in shock. Many covered their mouths with their hands, others wept openly. The girl's father, Ramiro, let out a cry of relief. Tears streamed down his tired face. And at the center of that unexplainable spectacle, Veronica smiled, not with pride, but with the calm certainty of someone who had known from the very beginning that faith could challenge even the hardest convictions. That courtroom was no longer just a hall of justice that morning, it had become a stage for something no one would ever forget. The entire courtroom remained in absolute silence. Judge Fausta, the man who for years had been the embodiment of severity and coldness, now stood before everyone, still trembling, leaning on the desk for support. His eyes, once cold as marble, were now full of tears, reflecting the shock and vulnerability of a man whose entire world had just been turned upside down. He tried to speak, but his voice broke. This is impossible," he murmured as if trying to convince himself. 7-year-old Veronica looked at him with the same calm she had carried from the start. "It is possible, Your Honor," she said softly, "but only if the gentleman believes in what is right." Those simple words, spoken by a child, pierced Judge Fausta's hardened heart like an arrow. The man who had been a prisoner of skepticism and arrogance now faced not only a physical miracle, but a far greater moral truth. His entire life, built on coldness and rigid rules, crumbled before the innocent faith of a little girl. The spectators who had mocked her moments earlier now wept in silence. Many fell to their knees in reverence, unable to comprehend what they had witnessed. Reporters, once hungry for scandal, now recorded every tear, every gesture, realizing they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered in history. Ramiro, the accused father, rose from the defendant's bench. The handcuffs still hung from his wrists. His eyes met his daughter's, filled only with pride and gratitude. He didn't need to say a word, her courage had spoken for them both. Fausta took a deep breath, wiped away his tears and looked at the girl. "Veronica," he said in a trembling voice now filled with something new, "you have taught me what no book of law ever could." Then he turned to the courtroom and with a voice of power that surprised everyone, declared, "Ramiro Sandoval is hereby cleared of all charges. This court will not be remembered as just another trial, but as the day when justice found truth in the heart of a child." Thunderous applause filled the chamber. Police officers, journalists, ordinary citizens, all stood, breaking the solemn protocol of the place. Ramiro fell to his knees, crying with relief. Veronica ran to him, and they embraced amid the applause. That simple yet powerful scene became the perfect image, the triumph of love and faith over the coldness of law. As for Judge Fausta, no one ever saw him the same way again. The man who had long represented merciless severity became a symbol of miracle and transformation, one that went far beyond legs that could move again. That day, everyone understood a profound truth. It was not only the judge's body that had been healed, it was his soul.